It's been the kind of summer day we like to refer to around here as January, which is why I'm wearing a flannel shirt in July. I hope everyone out there is comfortable wherever they are in their homes or wherever else they're tuning in to watch us today. A few things before we get started that you might want to know. This is the first in a series of author events that we're calling Books in Common that will take place every Thursday evening. A series that's a result of a partnership with two other Northwest independent bookstores. So I'd like to start off by thanking our friends at Paulina Springs Books in Sisters, Oregon, and Country Bookshelf for putting this together with us. It wouldn't be happening if we didn't all come together to work on this. We will be recording this and the other events for later viewing, so you can tell your friends that it's not too late to join us in this. Bear in mind that we can't see you, but of course you can see us. If you have any technical issues during the evening, we recommend just refreshing your browser first, and we find that the platform works best on Chrome, so that's something to bear in mind. There's a button marked Ask a Question at the bottom of the screen. You can use that at any time to submit a question that you'd like the authors to answer, and you can also vote for questions that others have submitted that you would like to hear answered. You can make comments at any time using the chat function on the right side of your screen, bearing in mind the rules that we all learned as early as kindergarten about kindness and respectfulness. Perhaps the most important button on your screen is the one at the bottom, which should be marked Buy, which will take you to a page where you can select from whichever bookstore that brought you here and purchase a book or two or three from these wonderful writers. You'll be supporting the work that they do and our ability to bring it to you and to bring these events to you. So without further ado, I will introduce our esteemed guests for the evening, starting with Elizabeth George, who is a New York Times bestselling author of close to 30 books, and notably those in the Inspector Lynley series, the most recent of which is The Punishment She Deserves. Great title. She's an Anthony and Agatha Award winner and a two-time Edgar nominee, as well as being the recipient of France's and Germany's top prizes for crime fiction. Her newest work is Mastering the Process, From Idea to Novel. She is a resident of Washington State. And our other author is Iona Whishaw, a Madison Books bestselling author and the creator of the Lane Winslow series of historical mysteries, the most recent of which is A Match Made for Murder, which matches my shirt pretty well, I think. She is a former teacher and an award-winning high school principal who has lived internationally but currently resides in British Columbia. And I'd like to thank both of you for being here. I'm very excited that this is the first in our series. And so I will step away and let you guys converse. We'll take I guess I should mention, we'll start off with some brief readings from each author's work and then a little bit of conversation back and forth. And we will let you get to your questions toward the later part of the program. So I'll see you later. Ladies, take it away.
Okay.
Thank you, James.
Go for it.
Elizabeth, how are you?
Yeah. Hello.
It's a fabulous privilege to be sitting here with you today.
Oh, well, likewise. It's really great. This is so new for me to do anything, through social media. I'm such a Luddite that everything has to be explained to me about 10 times before I'm able to do it. So I have my fingers crossed.
Absolutely.
Throughout this whole thing. Now you're
sure
going to read,
be
right?
Brilliant. Yeah, why don't I read a tiny, I think that one of the things we'd like to talk about is the whole question of writing what you know. And so, that's a very interesting question. And so I'm going to read a tiny little section, like literally 1 minute, from my new book, A Match Made for Murder. And what this really is to illustrate is the relationship between my two main characters who've just gotten married and have gone to Tucson, Arizona for their honeymoon. And there is, the murder's already taken place. And the very fancy, wealthy inn that they're staying in is kind of throwing a cocktail party to settle everybody's nerves because the murder happened at the inn. "What'll it be?" Darling asked. "Something exotic." She looked around and pointed at a woman holding a cocktail glass full of amber liquid. "Like that." Darling pushed off through the crowd, and Lane, standing near the fireplace, surveyed the increasingly smoky room. She was happy in a way she'd never imagined possible. She could see Darling across the room leaning on the bar and chided herself for the incongruity of her happiness in the face of the recent horrific events. But in the next moment, she fell fully to earth. Standing in the doorway with the double whiskey neat was a man who looked so like the recently deceased that she emitted a little gasp. She was watching the ash accumulating on the cigarette held loosely in the man's mouth with fascination when Darling made his way back, holding a whiskey and the amber drink. "It's called a sidecar," he said. "Chin chin." "Darling, look over there. I realize it's because this room is cast in atmospheric cocktail darkness, but that man looks exactly like the dead man." Here endeth the reading. Elizabeth.
Okay. I have some questions to ask you about that, but I'll do my I'll do my reading first. Although most of my book, well, although virtually everything I write takes place in Great Britain, I decided to read just a brief section from a kind of a lengthy short story that I wrote for a special edition. When I'm asked to write a short story, I only accept if I have an idea, and because generally I don't have ideas for short stories. Anyway, so this comes from a short story called "The Mysterious Disappearance of the Reluctant Book Fairy," and it takes place in Langley on Whidbey Island, where I used to live. For an entire generation, the story that follows could not be told. She who effected the vanishing of Langley, Washington's most famous citizen, was still among the living, and had the knowledge of exactly what she had done been revealed before this moment, there is little doubt that legions of the broken-hearted, the disenchanted, the disappointed, and the downright enraged would have ended up marching along the quiet street where she lived, bent upon violence. This, of course, would have followed whatever the aforementioned legions had done to a disused potting shed in the arboreal confines of Langley Cemetery, where the shape of a body on a moth-eaten blanket and a rotting first edition of an antique novel marked the spot of a deeply mourned departure. But now at last everything can be revealed, for all involved have finally passed and no danger remains to anyone. Langley, Washington has long since returned to the sleepy, albeit lovely little village that has sat above the gleaming waters of Saratoga Passage for more than 100 years. And what occurred there to its citizenry and to its gentle, well-meaning but far too malleable librarian has been consigned to history. Annapurna didn't start out her life intending to become a librarian. She also didn't start out her life intending to become a book fairy. Indeed, she didn't start out her life intending to become Annapurna. Instead, she began her time on Earth as Janet Shore in a very ordinary manner which, no matter how close the examination, would never suggest to anyone who was acquainted with her that she possessed powers beyond the average mortals. She was born at home in the village of Langley, which at that time was a little enclave of colorful cottages and, alas, perpetually dying businesses, sitting high on a bluff on Whidbey Island. Above the strait that it overlooked, bald eagles flew, and in this strait, orcas and gray whales swam. Goldfinches flashed the sunlight of their bodies in the air. Swallows chorused joyously from the eaves of old storefronts. Hummingbirds hovered before spikes of white quamash, and at just the right moment, in just the right season, starlings swooped in great dancing clouds near the terminal where the ferries came and went. Here hemlocks and firs soared into the heavens, rabbits openly munched unmolested in garden beds, raccoons were known to wander through the open alleyways of the middle school in search of discarded lunches, and deer high-stepped among the various cottages, disseminating everything from tulips to topiaries. Anyway, so that's the beginning of that short story. Now, we've talked a little bit about writing about what you know. And what I want to know from you, Iona, is how you feel about that whole idea of writing about what you know versus writing about that which you would like to know. How do you blend those two things in your books?
Um, I think if you were working with novice writers, I think writing what you know is a fabulous place to start. And I actually was going to do an event for the local organization, the Canadian Authors Organization, the Vancouver chapter, that was titled "There's a Book Only You Can Write."
Hmm.
And I felt that I feel like everybody has their own a kind of geography that they've grown up in and the language they've heard as they're growing up, and that is something that like your life's blood. So when I started writing my books, that was coming from a childhood geography of mine, and the language and the people and everything is very, very personal to me. So it was a really great place to start. And I feel like everybody who wants to write has that, right? Because everybody who wants to write has had a childhood and a place that they've been and a geography that they're coming from. And the other thing is, by the time you get to my age, you're younger than I am,
Oh,
you
my,
really know.
anyway, go ahead. Sorry.
You really you know so much, you don't know how much you know, and I think that's the point at which your brain starts constructing all kinds of things out of the 70 years of things you've gathered in your life. So I think it's a great place to start, but also to accept that inside you have a ton of things, and that they will come out as you're writing and be constructed with each other as you're writing. Tell me about how you see it, because you've written this
Yeah,
wonderful book about writing novels.
yeah, that's so interesting what you said, because for me, it's never been a case of write what you know, simply because I didn't think that there was really particularly anything in my life that was very interesting. When I started writing, I was a high school English teacher, and had been a high school English teacher for a number of years. I always wrote. I wrote short stories when I was young. I wrote my first novel when I was in high school. But what's sort of funny is that I have never ever written about what I know. I've always written about that which I would like to know, and and I'm not sure why that's the case. I think it's because I've never managed to kind of plumb the surface of anything that's particularly interesting in my life. And it could be that I am just not a deep enough individual to do that. It could be that I just, I just don't see those particular items in my life that might make for stories. I always tell people that if I was writing about what I knew, it would be being a high school English teacher, and I'd very quickly run out of people to kill, since I'd be kind of work my way through the high school unless I was killing students, and I wouldn't know where to go from there. So for me, it's been exactly the opposite of that. But what I noticed about your books that I think is so interesting is the part where you draw upon what you know from the environment in which you grew up, from that particular area in British Columbia, because you have made it so absolutely real. And what I wonder is, when you were doing that, when you decided, to set your first book in that area between Nelson and what's Queen's Cove, right? But in the book, it's King's Cove. When you made that decision, you weren't living there, right? Or were you?
No, I hadn't been living there for many, many years. I last lived there when I was in high school. But
Wow.
because these are childhood memories, I think they're literally, they grow into your being. Because whenever
Mm.
I thought about where my character was, outside her house, on the lake, wherever, I just have to close my eyes and be there, and everything is right there for me. So I think that's there for people. I mean, I'm interested because all this series of books takes place in that area, or in this one, I ventured to Tucson, where I spent 8 years of my life, going to high school, and I went to college from there. But I'm now working on a little series on the side where it takes place in England, in Rye. And my, all my relatives are English. My parents are English, or were English. They're not so much anything anymore. And so, when I go to England, the first place we go is Rye. So I've spent a lot of time there. But I can really tell the qualitative difference. Like, I know Rye quite well. Plus I spent a lot knowing I was going to write something. I went around, taking pictures and doing all the sort of thing you describe in your book. But it has a qualitative difference of knowing it from seeing it as an adult and knowing from having it be part of me. Does that make sense?
Well, yeah, it makes perfect sense, because what I was going to ask you is that when you set out to write the first book, were you doing all the external location stuff from memory, or did you actually go back and refresh your memory by going to Nelson, by going to that whole area of Lake Kootenay, and sort of getting involved once more in the environment, or was that all just from your memory?
Initially it was from my memory when I first started writing. And then we took a couple of trips up to the Kootenays, and really it's changed so little, from my childhood. I'm writing about a period that takes place about a decade before my childhood. I was born in 48, and these things take place even before then. And I lived there in the very early 50s until I was in high school in the 60s. So, it's remarkable how little it's changed. And I want to go back to your English teacher thing, actually, because I think that's interesting. I wonder if your reluctance to write about that part of your life. I was also an English teacher, and I worked in social services. So I worked with a lot of, kids undergoing a lot of difficulty in their lives, and so I have no desire to mine that part of my life either. And I wonder, people think of English teachers as boring. I must reject that immediately. But I'm not sure. I think because I'm not sure that I can engage with that, because there's almost too much there. I don't feel like those stories are mine, really, in lots of ways.
So when you must have a really good memory of your childhood, then, do you? Are there vast circumstances that you can bring to mind with all of the detail, or do you have to talk to people from your past about it?
I don't. Sometimes I ask my brother questions. He went to a one-room schoolhouse right near there, and I'll ask him various questions about that because I happen to be working on a book about a one-room schoolhouse. But generally, no. When I think about it, Philip Pullman's books.
No, I don't.
Anyway, he creates an Oxford that is. It looks kind of like Oxford, but it's not really Oxford in his Golden Compass series. And
does he
that's
call
kind
it
of how I.
Does he call it
it's
Oxford?
Called Oxford and everything else, but it's kind of it's a fantasy series for kids, but incredibly compelling reading. And I feel like my Nelson is that too. It's Nelson, you recognize it, but it's also kind of a made up place. Do you know what I'm saying?
Okay. Yeah.
So tell me how you
and I was just going to say, and yet it really resonates for you, and ends up resonating for the reader. Yeah, it's beautifully rendered. And I think that's that whole interesting part of writing, is being able to render a place and to make it real rather than just to sort of relate facts about a place. That's what I'm always trying to do.
I agree with you. And I always want to run to my encyclopedia, not my encyclopedia, to Google when I read the descriptions of the towns and villages and the counties that you go to in your books, because I think you make them very, very real and compelling in a way that I think is amazing. Because in some ways I think it's amazing because they're not part of your childhood. There's something you go and you learn about. So
Yes,
how do you
exactly.
do that?
Oh, well, it's exactly what you said. I go there. I can't really write about a place that I haven't been, because all of the sensory details would not be there in the writing. So what I do is, select a place that suggests story to me, and then I go to that place and see if indeed there's a potential to have a story take place there. And the weird thing is, a lot of it has to do with the topography of the place. I can't write about a place that's flat. I cannot do it. I years ago went to Clacton-on-Sea because I wanted to set a book along the Essex coastline in England, and I wanted sort of one of these, like a working class kind of holiday place, and
Right.
so I was staying north of it in Frinton-on-Sea, but Clacton was where I was going to set the book. And I went to Clacton and I thought, oh my God, what the hell am I going to do? There is no way I can write about this town because it was flat. It just, I don't know what it was. I don't know why, but that's how it works for me. And so I thought, I'm really in big trouble because I booked myself into this hotel, a really funny hotel that ended up becoming part of the book. But I booked myself into this hotel for a week, and I thought, I got to find someplace to set this book, and it sure is not going to be there. So I took an evening drive and then ended up in a place called Walton on the Naze. And as soon as I drove into the town, I knew that was it. I looked at it and I said, okay, this is what I'm looking for. And it's sort of that thing that you can't really put your finger on. It's sort of like it speaks to me. It tells me, here you will find a story. And so far,
I think that connection is important, right? Because you're in a place that it's not familiar to you, and you're becoming familiar with it. And
yeah.
I think the minute you say this is a place that I can build a story, you're beginning to make what I think is the next most important thing about this, is that emotional connection to the landscape.
Yeah,
Do you know what I'm saying?
absolutely.
Because your
Oh, yeah.
characters are always emotionally connected to where they live.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very true. If I have to be able to feel something for the place that I am looking at. For example, for 34 years, I lived in Southern California. And for most of the Lindley novels, I lived in Southern California. And there is no way that I could write about Southern California, except in a short story. I did write a short story that took place there. But the reason I couldn't write about it is that and don't mean to be offensive to anybody who's listening, but I loathe Southern California. And it was sort of like 34 years of unmitigated hell to have to live there. And there isn't really anything about it that I like. So there was no way that I could write a novel that was set there. I didn't even consider writing a novel that was set there. I knew that I had to write about a place that spoke to me. That's really interesting because I never really thought of it in terms of, having that emotional connection that I've always had with England, always, ever since my first trip there. And that must be really what drew me to write about it, to write stories, books that take place there, is the fact that there was that connection right from the beginning.
Obviously, ever since your previous life there.
Yeah, possibly. Yeah. One of the things that go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, one of the things that we were tossing back and forth in talking about is that like in advance of beginning one of your books, what is it that you need to know? Like, do you just dive into one of your books? You go, okay, well, this is going to be set in Tucson, and it's a real departure for me, and that's where I'm going to set the book. But aside from that setting, are there things that you need to know before you start the book?
I'm a bit of a diver, I must confess. But there is a very strong place I start. I always have a particular image, and I know that that's the one. You described in your recent book about writing, describing characters and then having something inside you that tells you, yes, this is right.
Yeah.
And I feel that a little bit like that about the image that I have. I can tell you with each of these books exactly what image came to my mind. That would be my starting point.
Can you give an
And you know,
example?
with the first book, the image was just that young woman going into that house that she's just bought for the first time. When
Oh.
it's the moment it's become hers. And I knew someone was going to have to
Oh.
die. And at that point, I didn't know who, and I didn't know why. And I just had to write my
God.
way there.
Wow.
More lately, I'm better at starting out knowing who's dead. I'm getting better at that, and that does help. You know, you called it the kernel. That does help.
Do you think that is that part of the fun of it for you to dive in and to discover things like that, like who's going to die? I
You
mean,
know
like,
what? Absolutely. For me, it's part of the creative process. You know, I came to writing novels very late. The first one came out when I was 64. And so for me, it really is all about the creative process.
yeah,
You know, so that means that every morning I sit down and I don't know what's going to happen. I'm not worried about it. I know something will happen. And I just begin to write. And, you know, it builds itself like that all the way through. And I tend to write in scenes. So I always think of the shape of my books as being like blocks, right?
Hmm.
There's a scene here, a scene here. I might go back 50 years for a scene here. And then I just assume that the readers will sort of put them all together and discover what they need to know. And I don't know if I mentioned this to you, but I had a very strong sense of the shape of your books as well. When I'd finished The Punishment She Deserves, I had this feeling of this wonderful spiral where everything begins to be collected on the outside. There's this story and these people, and they're all out here. And I know they're going to whirl closer and closer and closer together as we
Yeah.
come to the center of what, you know, how did this person die and why? And I had this
Yeah.
very strong sense of that shape for your books.
Do you find that approaching it the way you approach it, that you have to do a lot of revising as you go along or revising afterwards? Like when you get to the point where you've realized, oh, okay, this is going to be who the killer is. This is going to be who the victim is. So do you have to go back then and start revising, or how does that work?
Yeah, that's the trouble with being a, what is it people call it? Pantsers and whatever the other one is. Plotters and pantsers. That's right. And I'm a pantser. I go by the seat of my pants.
We call that, yeah, pantsing it. Yeah.
That's right. So I can get to the middle of a book and then suddenly go, oh, poop, I really need to stop now and figure what the hell's going out. And I do remember going to my husband and saying, oh my God, I'm going to have to do some real serious sorting out what's happened, because I've just thrown a bunch of things in and I need to make them work. And my husband said to me, uh-oh, pants are on fire, which I thought was quite cute. So yes, I don't know about revising. Yes, sometimes, but it's more having to just stop and maybe make some adjustments and, you know, make it so that the story can go on and make sense.
Yeah. I've never been able to approach it that way, doing a crime novel. I certainly have done like the short story that I was reading that part of. I just sat down and wrote it. It just sort of came out, and it did not require very much revision at all. But for a crime novel, I find that I've got to do a lot of advanced preparation, that I need to go into it knowing a lot more stuff about what's going to happen, certainly about the killer, the victim, and the motive. Absolutely. Now, Iona, I can't see you at this point. I don't know if anybody else. Oh, now I see you again. Oh, now I don't. Oh, now I'm the only one.
Now I can only see you. I can't see me.
I know. Oh, there you are.
Perhaps there we go.
No, we're okay. There you
hard
are.
At work behind us. Thank you, Jessica.
Yeah, for a while I just saw the little robot, so I thought, well, gosh, it's hard to talk to a robot. Anyway, so what I discovered, though, despite all my efforts at planning things in advance, that there are times when I just have to stop. And the book I'm working on right now, which is a Lindley novel, is very much a good example of that. I've done the research, I've done the location, I've done the characters, I've done all of that stuff, but I've actually had to start the book 5 different times because each time I realize, oh wow, there's something else that I really didn't know, I didn't really understand. My image is moving all over the screen. I don't know what's going on behind the scenes there. Anyway, can you hear me?
Elizabeth, when you say you write it 5 times, are you going back to the beginning to start
Oh,
it
yeah.
5 times, or are you writing the whole thing 5 times?
I am. It's just, this has been excruciating. I have never written a book. I've never had so much difficulty with a book. This is a very, very difficult book. It's one of those cases of, I call it the reader and the wave. And what I mean by that is that, if you think of the plot of a novel as a wave that's breaking, well, I want my reader to be swimming as hard as they can to keep up with the wave, to try to reach the crest of the wave. I don't want my reader to be in front of the breaking wave. And so if the reader's in front of the breaking wave, of course, what that means is that the reader knows something that the detectives are going to find out, but the reader already knows it. And so I've just bled the story of all kinds of suspense. And the problem with the book I'm working on right now is that there is a vital piece of information that needs to be placed in the right part of the book so that the reader is in the right part of the wave, behind the wave instead of in front of the wave. And that exact same thing happened in my last book too, and I had to begin that one again. As a matter of fact, there was an entire subplot in The Punishment She Deserves that I had to lift out by itself and then do a revision just on that subplot to make sure the whole thing worked. And that's what I'm doing on this one too, only the difference is that I'm doing it with every single plot and with the plot and with every single subplot too. So it's been brutal. I'm telling you, it's just been
are you finding that out because you've written X amount and then now you've reread it and thought, oh God, this is way too soon for this bit?
It's because generally what it is that it's because the story stalls out on me. Our fellow writer, T. Jefferson Parker, said something once that I've never forgotten. It was so wonderfully useful to me. It has been ever since. And what he said is, if your story stalls out on you, you played your hand too soon. And
that's very, very interesting.
It's absolutely the truth. So when I'm at that point where I realize I am really struggling right now, then that means there's something that I've already written that shouldn't be in the novel. That is either it's like it gives out too much information at that particular point, or it's a complication that wasn't necessary and that I have no way of getting out of, or it's a character behaving in a way that is totally anathema to the character analysis that I created, to the person I thought this character was supposed to be. I did that. That happened once, and that happened in a book called In Pursuit of the Proper Center, where I have this character in his character description, in the way he was created. He was a man who was deeply in love with his wife, and so. And so I was riding along, and he and Lindley go somewhere. I can't remember where they went. And there's this young police constable there. And the guy who was deeply in love with his wife didn't decide. I decided, oh, wouldn't it be interesting if this guy sort of is, fancies this woman, and they get together and have some kind of affair. Well, oh my God, talk about derailing the entire novel. I was completely lost. And then I thought maybe it would help me to read his character analysis again. So I read his character analysis and thought, oh my God, no wonder. He was never supposed to do that. That's not who this man is. It was like that. It was one of those things where I decided this is what you're going to do. And in my novels, and we should talk about
Interesting.
This. Yeah, in my novels, the characters always determine the plot. The plot doesn't determine the characters. The characters determine.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%.
Yeah. So do you find that the characters are sort of taking you by the hand and leading you through the story?
In a lot of ways, they are. I don't do the elaborate character kind of workup that you do necessarily. But I do think about the characters, and I remember something that one of my professors said when I was at the University of British Columbia, that you don't need to explain your characters; we just have to watch them behave. And so,
Absolutely. That's great.
as I'm writing, I'm watching them behave, and that is what gives me the clue to who they are and how they're going to behave, going forward. And then I think a big thing for me, because some of my characters are English, like my main character is English, but the detective she marries is Canadian. Most of the people she lives around are English. So I have to keep in mind of how people talk and what they do. And I'll often read through and then I'll just get really stuck with something where I go, this isn't true. This character would not behave like this. So somehow inside me, I know something is not true and I have to change that behavior. But I'm quite interested that you throw a character into an affair. I mean, is there some subconscious part of you that thought that affair might actually be useful in your plot?
No, I don't think so. I don't think so. No, because it was, no, it bore no relevance to the plot. And that was why it was so stupid, because, if in order to achieve some sort of thematic unity in a book, the subplots have to reflect in some way, the main plot. And
exactly.
This reflected nothing about the main plot whatsoever. No, not at all. It was totally dumb.
So could you just take that chunk out, or did you have to do a ton of rewriting?
No, I had to start over again. But it doesn't mean that when I start over again, like in the case of that book, it just meant that the scenes in which that character appeared all had to be rewritten. But the entirety of the novel did not have to be rewritten. And at that point, I think it was only about like 400 pages that were involved. Whereas the book I'm working on right now, it's about 600 pages that are involved in this revision, restructure, whatever I want to call it. And at this point, I still don't know if the way I'm approaching it now will work. I'm hoping it will. I'm hoping.
So how do you determine if it's working? I mean, do you go away and leave it for a couple of weeks and then come back and read it and go, okay, it's working, or okay, it's not working?
You know what it is? I've always trusted what my body tells me. I don't trust what my mind is telling me, because my mind is where the committee is, and the committee is, it's everybody like Sister Agnetus, my 6th grade teacher, my critical mother, everything. It's my ex-boyfriend. I mean, all these people are they're all in my committee. So I don't trust what my mind is telling me, but I do trust how my body feels about what I'm doing. And so when I get that sinking sensation, I trust the sinking sensation. I know that, okay, I've gone wrong here. Now, sometimes I just sort of plow on, not because I'm hoping that I will be able to work my way out of it, but because I know that if I can just get to the end of the bloody thing, I will then be able to revise it. But in the case of the book I'm working on right now, I couldn't get to the end. There was no way I could do it based on the way I was approaching it. So I knew I would just have to junk it and begin again. So that's it's kind of a bad feeling when you have to do that, I think. And but gosh, I want the books to be good, and so I'm willing to put in that that extra work to rewrite it and to make them good. I want to ask you a question about your main characters. So now you have your main characters, Lane and Inspector Darling, marrying, and then is there part of you that's facing okay, now what, or are they so closely attuned to each other in crime solving that they're just going to become a team of sleuths in this area where they live?
A lot of people queried them marrying. I think people were worried about it. Um, she is modeled a little bit on my mother, who had a lot of the Lane characteristics. She was beautiful. She had languages. She spent some time doing espionage during the war, in South Africa where they lived. And she suffers a little bit from what my mother suffered, which is, she's a grown woman living in this beautiful, idyllic community and doesn't really have a job, if you know what I'm saying. She's got a little independent money she lives on, and so she's just hanging out. But she has this real interest in crime, in solving the crimes and understanding why has this happened. And what I found now, I've got two books now. I have this one, When They're Together and Married, and the other one, which will come out next year. And they seem to be falling into a partnership. He still doesn't really like her getting involved because it's police work, but on the other hand, he's still very interested in learning from her about how he might want to see things, and what kind of connections he might want to make. And because she's a bit of a busybody, she gets around and she finds problems, bodies, and so on. And
so like that, she finds bodies.
Well, it's kind of become a thing. All of my books have a poem by her. They all end with the comment about Ames, and in every one of them, she's found the victim. So, I think they have a partnership, and they really have a very nice relationship. I'm quite happy with how they're getting along. Unfortunately, she can be a little bit secretive with her feelings and stuff like that. So I don't know where that's going to go, but we're working on that.
Interesting. Yeah, because I once in when I married Lindley off, there was always the question of, okay, now that Lindley is married, then what happens to that personal relationship? Because the person that he married was not a crime solver. She was his long time, well, not really that long, but she was his lover, although he had known her for many, many years as just a friend. But the question was, okay, now, what happens now? And that's an interesting thing I think we should talk about is, so when you're dealing with the series, are you aware of having to do something with the characters, like move them forward, have their stories advance and change and grow and develop, or do you not worry about that at all?
I'm conscious of it. That old idea of having an intention. I have the intention when I start that something is going to happen for these people. And so that seems to be enough for me to open up the possibilities as I'm writing, because I'm conscious of that being important, because otherwise they're just sort of, I think they would become two-dimensional, and I desperately don't want that for them. So as in life, anything that happens to you kind of changes you. And so I think, that balance of what's happening to them and what impact that has on them and on their relationship together. But I don't think ahead of time, this is going to happen in this book.
Mm-hmm. Do you put them into conflict once they're married? Are they then, do you have conflicts between them that have to be resolved? Or is their position in the novel more as, sleuths?
You know what? They have a very personal relationship, and it's 1947. And in lots of ways, the relationship that they have and the way they behave with each other is very much like that period. In the 60s, we were all gushing out all our feelings and going to therapists and all of that. But really, like the relationship between my mother and father, for example, was much more contained. And so how conflict happened was much more contained as well. And I would say,
oops, I can see she's off now. We're waiting. This is the beauty of technology.
Yeah. Oh,
We've
I'm hardly a
lost
replacement for Iona, but
We've lost her. We've lost her.
we will try to restore that part of her feed as soon as we can. Well, in the meanwhile, it was coincidence that I was going to pop in around now anyway to see if we could get some further questions from our audience.
Sure.
I will say while I'm here, I love that I've learned the terminology about pantsers and plotters.
Oh, yeah, that was pretty
A
funny.
dichotomy that I will definitely be applying to people in my life, whether they're writers or not. That seems eminently useful. I was going to ask you guys the question. Maybe this is what you guys were just touching on. I'll steal the first one selfishly. So there are mystery series or series of any type where the characters develop over time, change, things happen to them, and then you have things more like Agatha Christie, Hercule Poirot, published over 50 years and was the same person the whole time.
Exactly. Yeah.
Did you consider doing it that way, or were you compelled to create a character who would grow? How did you decide on that?
Yeah, I was compelled to create a character who would grow. I never liked series where the characters didn't grow, change, and develop, or where the author had established a particular set of relationships, and then you would get obligatory scenes of this character and that character, and maybe they were star-crossed lovers or whatever, but nothing was ever going to change. If they were star-crossed in the first book, they were going to be star-crossed lovers in the 35th book. So I don't care for those kinds of series. So I determined right from the very beginning that the circumstances in these characters' lives would change. The characters themselves would change. They would grow. They would develop, and would see where it would go as they went through time. So that was a deliberate choice on my part.
Is that a trend? Do you think or are there still a lot of people writing it the other way? It seems to me more of the crime fiction that I read now is like yours in that respect.
Yeah, I think it is. I think it is. I think that in the golden age of mystery, you saw more of those that were like frozen in time. Here she is. You're back.
I'm back.
Welcome.
Yes. I think what I want to say is I'm with Elizabeth on this. They have to. For me, the issue is they have to be real people.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm paying attention to them as they're behaving in my books. Like, are they doing what real people would do? And real people change, and real people get confused and don't know how to handle things, and all of those things. So for me, there's no question. I don't think I could have written in the golden age because of the very thing we're talking about. Because a good crime novel is a novel.
Mm-hmm.
Right? P.D. James always said that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with that. And in a novel, you have characters who grow, change, and develop in the course of one novel, and so certainly you would want that in the course of 50 novels. I do think that I read somewhere where at the very end, Agatha Christie was very sorry that she had made Hercule Poirot the person that she had made Hercule Poirot, but she was thoroughly sick of writing about the little Belgian detective.
I read that too. That was very funny. Yeah.
And you can understand why after a while. I mean, see, the thing is that for me, if the characters' circumstances change, if they change, that keeps them interesting. If they're always the same person that I'm sort of trotting through a crime and, and they go and they solve the crime, it wouldn't be interesting to me as a writer. And I think, therefore, it would not be that interesting for the reader either. James, did you want to take another question?
Yeah, I've got one here. Well, I'll start. This one is directed to Iona. It starts by saying that each novel in the series was a joy to read, which was the case for me, and I think for Elizabeth as well. Said that she loves the way that your amateur sleuth relies more on insight and intuition than on forensic science to help her solve the mystery, and asks about the challenges of writing a historical sleuth story.
Yes, that's an excellent question. One of the challenges is you do have to kind of do a little bit of research about what kind of forensic science
Yes.
was already
Yeah.
in use at the time, you know, and some things they were still struggling with, and some they had down pat. So fingerprinting and all of that was old hat, but they didn't have the study of blood in the way that they do later on. And so that's part of the challenge. Is I want to make sure that they can use tools they have access to at the time. So that often means quite a lot of looking up. And I think the other challenge about writing a historical novel is, you know, I try to make sure that I'm reflecting some, especially because my books are quite localized to the Nelson area or to British Columbia in some ways, but also the world. You know, she's been a spy in Britain, and so, you know, Canada's full of Russian spies at the time and so on. That you want to get that information right, but you don't want to pile it on so that people are kind of, you know, their eyes are bubbling. They don't want to see any of your research. I think you talked, Elizabeth, about kind of burying it in the story.
Yeah.
But any kind of historical thing that I have in there, I'm very, very, very fussy about it being exactly right, because, you know, it's 1947, so you've got the home children, and there are descendants of the home children all over Canada. Thousands of people are descendants of home children.
What is that, Iona? What's the home
The
children?
home children were children that were scooped off the streets of big cities in England and Scotland, and, you know, sent off to Canada from the late 1800s right up through the 40s to work on farms and all
Oh my
of that, to
gosh.
get them out of the city. And, you know, it became kind of a racket towards the end. Sometimes children were taken whose parents were still alive, and they didn't come home at the end of the day because they'd been scooped up and sent somewhere.
Oh,
And, you know, Australia has them, New Zealand has them, Canada has them. So, you know, I wanted to make sure that I got those things right, because their descendants are here and they might be reading my books. And same with the Sudetenland refugees. You know, I mean, I had a letter from the daughter of someone who'd been one of the first refugees in the place I describe in my fifth book. And, you know, she was very complimentary. She said, reading your book was like listening to my dad talk about what it was like. So that for me is just the thing is, I don't want to plow you with history, but I want to make sure that what I have is right.
Good. Here's a question for Elizabeth, mentioning that you recently posted a photo of your workroom where piles of note cards were placed around the room. What was on those note cards?
Oh, let's see. They weren't really note cards. They were sheets of 8.5 by 11 paper that I cut into thirds. And I think that the person's probably referring to the step outline, because what I'm doing, part of my process is to create a step outline that shows me the order the scenes are going to go in, and that's what I put them on. So at the top of one, it will say Linley. At the top of one of the pieces of paper, it'll say Linley, and then underneath that, it will say what needs to happen in a particular scene with Linley. And so I write it on that, and then I put it on the floor, and then I go on to the next one and the next one. And I try to get about 20 of these before I go on. So in that particular picture, it's actually the living room in my condo, which serves as my office. And yeah, there was stuff everywhere. As a matter of fact, one of my fellow writers stopped by yesterday, and we went down masked and gloved to get a cup of coffee down the street, and then came back and sat carefully 6 feet apart and talked. And she looked around, and there was stuff everywhere. I mean, it's everywhere. And where the dining room table is, there's filled with stuff. In the kitchen, there's a counter was filled with stuff, and that sort of reflects what it looks like when I'm writing a book. It just there's just stuff everywhere. You know, notebooks, maps, photographs, hundreds of photographs. It's all over the place.
That same sort of thing happens in bookstores when you convert them from retail centers to shipping and delivery centers during pandemics, by the way.
Oh, I bet.
Yes.
I bet.
A question for Iona. The questioner says, I am in no way ready for you to end the Lane Winslow series, but I'm wondering how you think you would end it. Would you kill off Lane or have her ride off into the sunsets? Why?
That's interesting.
Oh, Yeah. My goodness. Here's the problem. I too don't want them to end. So, I think there would be an end if it got terribly domestic. Like, they had a couple of kids and she had, you know what I'm saying? That I'm just wondering about that. I'm struggling a little bit with that idea. In
I
1947,
was
when
going to
people
ask
got
you
married,
about
they
that.
often had children.
I was going to
Yeah, I
ask you
don't
about
know.
that, Iona. Have you thought about that now that you've got them married? I mean, it would be natural that, especially post-war, it would be pretty natural
I
for
know.
them to have children. That's
They
sort of what
must
happened.
contribute to the boom.
Exactly.
Yeah, I don't know that I'm ready for that yet. And also, I've written 7 books. The 8th one is coming out in the spring. And, the stories take place over the course of a year and a half. Right.
Oh, good.
So I'm right. So I'm not moving forward.
That is so
It's not going to
smart.
be 1948 for a couple of books, I'm sure.
Yeah. That's really smart to do it that way. It makes a lot more sense.
Here's one for Elizabeth, which is preceded by the comment, love your books. Would be very curious to know if there was a particular incident or reason that you chose to start the Inspector Lindley books.
There really wasn't an incident other than the fact that I was teaching a course at the high school level in the mystery story, the mystery novel, the mystery story. And as I taught that course, you have to, you deconstruct something in order to figure out how to teach it. And as I did my deconstruction and my teaching, I was using Dorothy L. Sayers' History of the Mystery Story, which is a lengthy essay about mystery stories, crime writing, and she talks about different motifs that are used. It's really an interesting essay, and I kind of used that as the basis of the book, the class I was teaching. But as I was teaching it, I thought, you know what? I think I might be able to write one of these. And I had always wanted to be a writer. I had always written. I've been writing since I was 7 years old. But as far as being a serious writer, I could never really, get my mind around what it was I was actually going to write. And then when I did this course, I thought, you know what? I think this is it. I think that I can do crime novels. And so then it became a case of figuring out who the characters were going to be. I always knew it would be set in England. I never considered setting them anyplace else. And I had to assemble my cast of characters first, and then from there, I just went on. So there was nothing going on in my life, my personal life, other than having taught that class.
That ties into a question that I was going to ask about, because you talked a bit about how you guys write and why a little bit, but the question of why crime fiction as opposed to something else, which I think you just answered. Iona, do you have a reason that it was a genre?
Well, the first reason, of course, is that I love it. I love crime fiction. I love series. But on a deeper level, I think what really I find attractive, and I was actually going to ask about this with you, Elizabeth, too, is in crime situations, you find people in extremis, at their highest points of pressure, and how they behave and what they do interests me very, very much. And I think part of that is, I spend a lot of time as a younger woman working with kind of street kids and kids in trouble and things like that. And so even though I don't write that story about those kids, the things I learned about how people are when it's highly stressful and, things are going badly do appear in my books. And I think the other thing that I think we all like about crime books, because right now we're sitting in the middle of a kind of situation in the world where you can't really assume there's going to be a happy ending anywhere, or what I'm saying. And the thing about the crime fiction is you get that impulse towards resolution and justice. And I think that's something that I personally like to read about, and to why I like crime fiction, but also why that appears in my books.
That leads to something else that I was going to ask about. And I'm not sure if this is something that applies as much to crime fiction as it might to something like TV cop shows or films. But I'm wondering, because of the events in recent months, whether you think that the crime genre has contributed to promoting a sense of policing in a negative way, like an overemphasis on crime as opposed to systemic solutions to societal problems. To turn everything to if you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. If that question made sense at all to you.
That's a great line.
Elizabeth, you should answer that because you're writing about the contemporary times.
Well, so James, are you asking whether the current examination of the way the police behave would affect the crime novel, or would make us more reluctant to write the crime novel? Or because I'm not quite understanding the question.
Those are both good questions. I think what I was trying to awkwardly ask was if the popularity of the crime novel has contributed to treating the police or treating policing as something that is not to be examined. The sort of trusting that,
okay.
This is how we solve the problem, by bringing in the police to solve the crime as opposed to doing something else.
I don't think so. Certainly not for me. It hasn't, because I think that on the one hand, there have been enough exposés of incredible miscarriages of justice, especially in the United States, that people can really see a clear difference between between fiction and reality, and that I don't think that the crime novels, especially the ones that I write, would have any effect whatsoever on on people's perception. I think the one thing that crime novels do tend to do is give people a greater sense give people a sense that there is justice in a world where there really isn't any justice, and perhaps we do a disservice to mankind, portraying things that way. Although I have to say in my own defense that frequently my books do not have happy endings. I mean, they have satisfying endings, but it's not like everybody lives happily ever after once the crime has been committed and the bad guy gets carted off to jail. So I'd have to say that I think there's a real difference between the crime fighters that certainly the ones that I'm writing about, and the actual police out there on the street.
Another question from the audience for Iona, mentioning that in your series, Lane often uses a sketch map to keep track of where events in the village take place and how to identify the places suspects say they were, and that helps her make connections to solve the murders. Do you use visual aids like that in plotting of the novels?
That's an excellent question, and I don't want to be frivolous, but by the time Lane is doing that, I'm actually using her map to figure out where I'm going.
Okay.
So, in some ways it came up as a way for me to sort, what's actually going on. Because I think a little bit of the nature of my books is that the reader is solving the crime at the same time as the writer, if you see what I'm saying. So they're going along with it. So, but I also just like I like anything where you're talking about how the brain connects information, right? And, what I like about what she does is it connects information to an actual physical place. So once you begin to see the people in the physical places where they are, it opens up all the possibilities of the other connections that may have taken place or were possible to take place. And that kind of reflects everything about my approach to writing. I sit down and I write, and I don't think a whole lot about what I'm going to write that day, because, as I said earlier, the creative process is it unfolding for me. And I don't do a lot of stopping to redo things, because what I want my brain to do is to go ahead and just make those connections and have me put them all down. And I can go and check tomorrow to see whether they make sense or not, right? So I think that's more my process, but it still involves how the brain works with things.
That relates to the next one, which is for Elizabeth, mentioning that you have written your series of Lindley novels for 3 decades, and asks if it's difficult to keep track of those details of character. How do you stay on top of all of that?
Oh,
Good
yeah,
question.
sometimes I think I should probably post questions on some website where people could answer questions about my own novels for me, because there's certain things that I do, that I completely forget. The major things about the continuing characters' lives, though, are pretty indelible in my head. There might be minor details that are more problematic for me. I think one thing that really helped me early on with my books is the decision that nobody would exist without any kind of connection whatsoever. I mean, even Barbara Havers, in the first several books, both of her parents were alive. Now both of her parents are dead, and in the first book, her brother has already passed away from leukemia. But the fact that all the characters all have families has been really helpful for me in being able to ground the characters in reality. Trying to think if there's something, some specific thing that I've had to really wonder about. And it would probably have to do with the name of the character more than anything else, because all the rest of the stuff, there's certain standard things about them that that I made special enough for me, not because I wanted to remember them, but because I would be too bored writing about it if it weren't special. So, but because it was special enough to me, like St. James's car, he drives a racing green MGTD Classic. So why? Because I really love that car. And so that's been really, I never have to go back and go, God, what kind of car did St. James drive? Because I deliberately gave him that kind of really special car to drive. So no, I think I've been able to keep it all pretty straight for the past 30 years.
Okay. There's a question here that asks one, I think maybe even I can answer this, about what the first Inspector Lindley book is, which is A Great Deliverance.
Yeah.
If I'm not mistaken. And I'm glad that was asked, because it's a good opportunity for me to mention again, this is a wonderful time to press that buy your books button and pick up that book or one of the other ones from these authors who have shared their time with us today. There's a question here, just a few more we'll get through, for Iona, from someone who is here with Iona's #1 fan, her mom. And would like to know if there are plans to delve into Ames's past in the books, in future books.
I think so. I think there's room for Ames to develop a little bit. I actually, wherever I go to do events, back in the day when one did events, there was always several people in the audience whose favorite character was Sergeant Ames, Constable Ames as he was. So, right now he's kind of a harmless, cheerful fellow who lives with his mom. But, I already introduced a little bit of his past. His dad was a World War I veteran who had quite bad PTSD. And so, made their life difficult when he was a child. But I think there's more to do with Ames. So yeah, I'm interested and excited about him.
Okay, just a couple more here. One asks Elizabeth whether you had to eliminate the character of Helen because of the problem of her not being involved in police work, that she wouldn't fit in on an ongoing basis.
No, it had nothing to do with that. It had to do with the fact that that I really felt that story had run its course. Helen was, she was married to Lindley. She was pregnant. They had had a number of issues that they really had to resolve. She had a profound sense of unworthiness because she ended up doing exactly what her father intended her to do, which was to be the wife of somebody with a title. And in this day and age, to choose an easy life, to be an it girl, which is basically what she was, caused her ultimately a lot of self-harm, as it were. Anyway, but what happened is once she agreed to marry Lindley, and then she became pregnant. So you can see what's happening is that the story is closing down, which is why I asked Iona about Darling and Lane. Because once the story starts closing down, you have to do something to open it up again. And here she is pregnant, and as I like to tell people when I get asked this question at signings, there's a reason why there are no famous babies in literature, and it's because there's no drama in a baby unless the baby's kidnapped or gets a terrible disease or something like that. Then you have that particular drama. But I didn't want to go in that direction. So that meant that if Lindley's story is closing, I have to do something to open it up again. And you open up a story by bringing in another character or by getting rid of a character. Well, if I were to bring in another character to Lindley's story, I suppose it could be, the nanny who's going to take care of the baby with whom Lindley has an affair, except that Lindley would never do that. That's just not who he is. So that meant, okay, that's not going to work out. Therefore, is Helen going to have an affair? Nah, she wouldn't do that either. They've been through too much. So I think the best thing to do is to eliminate Helen, but to do it in such a way that it just sort of explodes Lindley's life. And so, and I also wanted to do it in a way that the reader felt in small part what Lindley felt. Because it's like the kind of thing that the reader does not expect. They don't expect one of the continuing characters, first of all, they get shot all the time, but they certainly don't expect the continuing character to be on life support and then have somebody pull the plug. So I think that allowed the reader to feel stuff.
Readers definitely felt that, because I don't know anybody in my circle who read your books who don't say, why did she kill off Helen?
Yeah, I even had people say, I never really liked Helen that much, but God, I was so mad when you killed her.
I think we've got one more here for Iona about the possibility of a TV production. Have you been approached about this? Is there any interest in that? I know the Lindley series was made into a fairly acclaimed series in the UK, but how about Lane Winslow?
There's definitely been some nibbles, but I do want to say from their lips to some producers' ears, I think it would make a very nice series. And there's 1,000 places in British Columbia you could film it. Throw in a couple of old cars, and Bob's your uncle. I mean, really, it wouldn't be, a stressful historical kind of challenge to do. So I'm still hopeful. I think it would be really fun.
Good. Well, I certainly agree. Did you have a good experience with the creation of the series out of your books, Elizabeth?
I'd say it was an interesting experience. The one thing that I did know is that when you decide to allow somebody to adapt your books, you pretty much have to kiss them goodbye and just hope for the best.
That's right.
And so I did not get emotionally overwrought about what was going on with my books. I think that they did a fairly good job with them. I think although the actors didn't look like the characters, I felt that they got the essence of the characters right. And so overall, it was a pretty good experience. And I really enjoyed going on the set and actually watching some of the filming of it, because it really convinced me that probably the worst job on earth is to be an actor, since they basically just sort of sit there and they say it's like watching paint dry. They just, they get called and they go in and they act for 5 minutes and then they leave, and then everybody else has all the really interesting jobs because it's the lighting guy and the director of photography and all these people with fascinating jobs. So that part was really kind of interesting.
I have a question about that, Elizabeth, because, they were excellent programs. In fact, I was shocked reading The Punishment She Deserves to be reminded that Lindley was blonde.
Yeah.
Did any part of having them filmed affect how you wrote the characters as you were going on, like in later books?
No. Yeah, not at all. Back and forth? Not at all. It was really kind of interesting because I can't listen to any of the audiobooks In the old days of doing books on tape and stuff, I could never listen to those because that really threw me because of their voices. But it was very interesting that seeing them done on screen had absolutely no effect on me at all. So it didn't influence me. It didn't make it more difficult, didn't make it easier, nothing.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, that was nice.
Well, this is great. I've had a wonderful time with you both. I have to say, both of you are, I feel such a personal connection to your books. Both of you feel like, house authors for my little bookstore. And I'm glad to be able to share you guys with, Paulina Springs' audience and Country Bookshelf's audience and all around the world, wherever else people are watching. So I want to thank you both for being here. And I hope all of you can join us next week.
It's an enormous pleasure.
Oh, good. We'll have Philip Margolin next week, so maybe people can tune in for that. So again, thanks everybody for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks. Good night.
Bye-bye.